Another year in the books, and that means it's time to look back at how much of it we spent in the theater. From charmingly sweet to frighteningly goopy, this year had a little bit of everything, cinematically speaking. So, here are our picks for the 10 best movies of 2024. Writing these best ofs is always a trick. I usually try to find some great trend in my favorite movies of the year, but 2024 felt like more of a mixed bag than usual. Maybe the big names weren't as big as they could have been, but everybody else showed up with something different, and honestly, this year was kind of a big, weird blast. A lot of movies that honestly surprised me. And so, thinking about approaching this list in that way, that's when I realized, how cool is that? But before I get to the properly weird stuff, we need the juxtaposition. Something to compare the surprises to, the control group, setting the baseline for what comes next. Plus, I just want to get them out of the way. Summer didn't quite have the same explosive feeling as it has in years past, but that's not to say we didn't have those big tentpole highlights. Godzilla and Kong multiplied, Furiosa went mad all by herself, and of course, our two favorite bad boys ride or died their way back into cinemas. Each of these movies had their moments that very much earned a big screen, as did Ridley Scott's return to ancient Rome with Gladiator 2, but where long-distance sequels are concerned, Twisters was surprisingly the best of the bunch, wrangling a nostalgic tornado with the same swagger and fun as the original. But for our number 10 pick, we're going with the sequel that didn't take quite so long to show up, Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2.
They may be curious to hear my side of the story, don't you think? I am Paul Atreides, son of Leto Atreides, Duke of Arrakis.
That we got half of an incredible Dune adaptation with 2021's Dune Part 1 was honestly kind of enough. That Part 2 landed just as successfully was an absolute treat. Denis Villeneuve uses a sense of massive scale alongside incredibly personal stakes in a way that's become a trademark of his filmmaking. It's less about a man learning to ride a giant sandworm, but more about how difficult it is to stand on his own 2 feet. And the most impressive part about Dune Part 2 is how that approach exists in the adaptation itself. The changes made to the narrative are subtle, but key. They reflect the spirit of the work, if not the text of it, giving both movies the feel of somebody describing their favorite book and how it's even more relevant to the times now as it was when it was written. And so, characters' motives come from a slightly different place because that's how Villeneuve always read it. Story points are brought to the fore or jettisoned completely depending on how much they matter to the version of the story being told in the film. The pleasant surprise with Dune Part 2 is that the adaptation is perfect in that it's not exact. And with how the film ends, Dune Part 3 will be no different. If you didn't notice, in number 10, all those movies were sequels, reboots, remakes, and franchises. And I'd do just as well trying to stop the wind from blowing as I would getting upset by the proliferation of these types of films in Hollywood these days, even though Twisters posited that we actually could kind of stop the wind from blowing. But instead, the best I can do is highlight the non-franchise winners we actually got this year. Those action movies that dared to be original, not based on anything that guaranteed at least some audience was waiting for it out there. These movies prove there are still good ideas that haven't been made yet. Even within this category, the variety was great. Jason Statham proved once again that it for sure doesn't matter for whom he's kicking ass, because The Beekeeper was honestly kind of fun. Brad Pitt and George Clooney showed they're indeed the last movie stars, making Wolves more entertaining than it would have been with anybody else. Monkey Man, which showed off Dev Patel's directing chops and his abs, learned all the right lessons from John Wick, and layered a bit of Indian and Hindu culture on top of them. It also made nearly 4 times its budget, which is another lesson it learned from The High Table. But for our number 9 spot, and the original action movie that most pleasantly surprised me, we're staying stateside with Jeremy Saulnier's Rebel Ridge.
Here come your peeps.
Chief!
You want to honor that deal, or do I got to transition to
Put
E?
some distance between you.
Let's not do that.
Hey!
The story of an ex-Marine stumbling into small-town corruption in Louisiana is lighter on capital A action than some, but Jeremy Saulnier's ability to weave tension into every corner of his films gives Rebel Ridge a ferocity that few action flicks can match. The surprising thing about the film, though, is in its DNA. Rebel Ridge is a contemporary Rambo, set in the age of unfair civil forfeiture, with Aaron Pierre's Terry Richmond as the titular veteran running afoul of backwoods law enforcement. A remake of a tried-and-true formula wasn't the surprise, though, as every time you expect the one-against-many bloodbath of the John Wick era of action choreography, you get non-lethal disarming, bruises instead of bullet holes. The film is infused with non-violence, but manages to be as stressful and infuriating as anything I've seen in a long time. Richmond, a close-quarters combat instructor in the Marines, goes out of his way, as does Saulnier and the film, to expose the corruption, defeat the incredibly good at being awful Don Johnson, and all the rest of the standard action movie musts, without spilling a drop of blood. It's a truly unique accomplishment. Before we get too deep into this, let's get some jokes in here. Every year when we put these lists together, comedy is always the toughest genre to say whether or not it was a good or bad year. There were laughs, to be sure, but not too many we'll still be talking about in a few years' time. There was Sasquatch Sunset, the impossible-to-describe movie that surprised the hell out of me at Sundance. The potentially more impossible-to-describe Hundreds of Beavers that got a streaming release after a few years' worth of festival circuit is a truly bizarre bit of cinema. And the feeling that the time for doing something has passed is a very funny, very deadpan ode to both the struggle to make meaningful connections in life and BDSM. But this year also gave us the grinning charm of Glenn Powell as a hitman, the old reliable biopic feel of Saturday Night, and a movie I want to get to for my number 8 pick before we abandon action completely, the story of a scammed granny just trying to get her money back in Thelma.
They contact people at random using telephone listings and social networking sites.
Like Facebook?
Sure, like Facebook.
Well, how can Zuckerberg let this happen?
Sorry?
Shouldn't Zuckerberg be able to fix this?
Are you on Facebook?
Am I?
No, you're not. She's not.
This movie is just sweet. June Squibb is the titular nonagenarian who loses $10,000 over the phone to a scammer. Along with Richard Roundtree in what turned out to be the Shaft actor's final role, Thelma sets out across Los Angeles to get her money back. Her incredibly concerned grandson and her concerned mingled with angry daughter and son-in-law round out a great cast with a charming and believable family dynamic, and that's more or less it. Except for the fact that this movie also understands action movies.
What?
I didn't say anything.
If Rebel Ridge subverted our expectations with non-violence, Thelma recognizes our expectations and plays along with them, all the while focused on the heart of the story unfolding. So, it treats Thelma's attempts to navigate a bank's login screen as a heroic moment for a grandson to come to her aid, while also never taking away any of Thelma's own heroism. As silly as it may seem to put a 93-year-old woman on a quest for justice, it is silly, by the way, and it's a feature, not a bug, Thelma has a dignity to it as well. It's warm and heartfelt and a comedy that truly surprised me. In the movie Cul-de-sac of Our Brains, comedy's neighbor is, I think, the thriller. Laughing is just a tonal tweak away from tension, so it wouldn't be a stretch to think that some of thriller's Amazon packages wind up on comedy's front porch. This year's crop of thrillers saw Jeff Nichols show up with a ton of tough guy accents for the bike riders. A Quiet Place Day One, which may qualify for more than a couple categories, is getting a mention here because of how well the film delivered a fresh and harrowing story from a familiar franchise. Former world champion of the thriller, M. Night Shyamalan, swam in the wake of the Eras tour with the more fun than I expected Trap, while actors Anna Kendrick and Zoe Kravitz took their first and very capable swings at directing thrillers with Woman of the Hour and Blink Twice. But our favorite of the year, another surprising blend of genres that lands in the thriller spot just because, Rose Glass's Love Lies Bleeding.
How many people are down there? Seemed like a lot in those days. You keep it up?
No one can connect me to bones.
I can.
Are you threatening me?
Yep.
Love Lies Bleeding is a roided up 80s pulp fest of bodybuilders, hallucinations, magical realism, murder, blackmail, revenge, romance, the feds, and a criminal empire in a dusty corner of New Mexico. While that seems like a lot going on, that's also just a lot to like. Rose Glass blends all of it together in a way that makes the unexpected also make sense. So, by the time one character vomits up another on stage during a bodybuilding contest, it's like, yeah, of course she did. What's next? When a film can balance imagery like that with the tropes we know from our favorite crime thrillers while also making a proper star out of Katie O'Brien, continuing Kristen Stewart's fascinating indie career, and getting Ed Harris to wear that wig, Love Lies Bleeding is really something to celebrate. Let's real quick check back into reality before things get too much and move over to documentaries. And even for movies that pull from the real stories already written here in real life, there were a lot of flavors this year, and honestly, out of all the genres we're talking about, documentaries might have had the strongest field. There were some outstanding music documentaries like Eno and Devo. There were love letters to cinema like Scorsese's Made in England and Superman. Small and heartfelt profiles like Will and Harper and The Remarkable Life of Evelyn. There was also these sweaty palms of Skywalkers right alongside pictures of ghosts as a quiet meditation on space and time, while war games simulated a government takeover. In the meantime, where things that are different are concerned, I'm picking the crushingly poetic Opus. The simplicity of Ryuichi Sakamoto's Opus is its true strength. Filmed only a few months before his death, Opus is a document of one last concert. That Sakamoto had a fascinating career spanning mediums and genres, composing for filmmakers from Bernardo Bertolucci to Brian De Palma is almost beside the point. Opus was filmed intimately, in gorgeous black and white, on a single stage at a single piano, with stands and cables visible in the background. Even moments where Sakamoto pauses to clear his throat are left in. The film, directed by his son at a time when Sakamoto knew his battle with cancer was coming to an end, is not an ode to any sort of virtuosic performance. Instead, it's a portrait of a man who loved his music, spending one last session with it. Opus is quiet but captivating throughout, and a genuine privilege that an artist could leave one last piece of himself behind. The opposite of documentary, one could argue, and I suppose I will right now, is the realm of science fiction. And here, I'm not sure science fiction had as good a year as the nonfiction. Alien Romulus mostly capably scratched our xenomorph itch, but that could have very well been mentioned in our first franchise-heavy category alongside Dune. The same can be said for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The animated Wild Robot was a futuristic take on Parenthood that made both me and my daughter cry, although, if I'm allowed a quick tangent here, there was a better version of a similar story called Flow, a French and Latvian piece of animation, more fantasy than sci-fi, about a group of animals surviving during a time of rising waters that's some of the most gorgeous and inventive filmmaking I've seen in a long time. It's charming and harrowing with a distinctive visual style and fits right in with my theme of only picking movies that surprise me. What's incredible about the film is that the animals are just animals. They don't speak or have names, and they behave for the most part as actual animals would, and because of that, everything the movie tries to do, from heartstring tugging to avant-garde cat videoing, is that much more effective. And while I'm on this tangent, Flow is the whole reason I'm not including an animation category in this list. There were good entries out there, but Kung Fu Panda 4, Moana 2, Inside Out 2, Despicable Me 4, Transformers 1, which is actually like the 20th Transformers movie, and a prequel to the Lion King remake, while a good film on its own, they just don't inspire a ton. Flow, on the other hand, did. But this is the sci-fi category, so tangent finished. The Beast was perhaps the cleanest post-apocalyptic film ever made, with a very cool narrative device that glimpses a future in which we have to erase the traumas of our past. I saw the TV Globe bent genres to the point that I think it qualifies here as something truly unique, and while divisive as it was, Megalopolis deserves a mention here as a legendary filmmaker took a big weird swing. But the science fiction that gets this spot, though, is the substance. An aging superstar being pushed out of her fitness show turns to a radical procedure in which she cracks open and births a younger version of herself, became the "oh my god, this movie of the year" when it debuted at Cannes, and for good reason. Equal parts Cronenberg and Sunset Boulevard, the substance is body horror, satire, social commentary, and surprisingly pretty funny. There's empathy for Demi Moore's Elizabeth Sparkle. You get why she turns to the mysterious substance in the first place. You share her alter ego Sue's fascination with her new life, and you hate all the reductive and selfish people that surround them both. It's a movie that so thoroughly roots you in a character's unique experience that also manages effectively and thoughtfully to gross you out, which is a difficult trick to pull off. As usual, horror as a genre did a bunch of different things this year. From old reliable formulas to experimental new voices, which itself is an old reliable trait of scary movies, horror films had a solid enough showing in 2024. Abigail mixed heists with vampires and proved Dan Stevens has a blast no matter what he's doing. Late Night with the Devil put a clever twist on found footage, making the bulk of its runtime more of a found broadcast. In a Violent Nature shifted the perspective to the side of the relentless killing machine. Oddity was a witchy supernatural folktale that scared with vibes alone for most of its runtime, and Longlegs let Nicolas Cage sneak into Silence of the Lambs to terrifying results. But for our number 4 slot for horror, and honestly the least surprising pick in my effort to pick nothing but surprises, we're going with Robert Eggers' remake of Nosferatu.
I have wrestled with the devil as Jacob wrestled the angel in Penuel, and I tell you, if we are to tame darkness, we must first face that it exists. Meine Herren, we are here encountering the undead plague carrier, the vampire, Nosferatu.
Eggers' version of the classic vampire mythos was close to 10 years in the making, a perfect marriage of filmmaker and subject. I was eagerly waiting for this movie to become a reality, which is why it is the least surprising entry here. Eggers lends his incredible skill for atmosphere to a story from the time before vampires were cool. Before vampires were ubiquitous enough to be jokes, or punk rockers, or glittery, there was Nosferatu, and that's the most refreshing thing about this film. Bill Skarsgård is terrifying as the lurking Count Orlok, embodying the slow and seductive terror these creatures of the night became known for. And it's not just Skarsgård's performance that deserves to be called out here. Aaron Taylor Johnson's Frederick Harding is one of the actor's best performances, hot off the heels of one that's arguably his worst. And Lily Rose Depp is captivating in her portrayal of Ellen Hunter, highlighting both tender moments with her loved ones as well as unhinged moments of possession, all underlined with the palpable fear that Orlok is coming. But Eggers builds a movie that, like its titular vision, entrances without ever letting go, no matter the horrors it confronts you with. What's more, where remakes in 2024 are concerned, this is one that does it right. You can point to spots that are clear homages to the original, to Herzog's version, and even the gothic romance of Coppola's Dracula from the 90s, but the sum of those parts is something new, something that gets why this story endures and is worth retelling, and not just because it's in the public domain. If you feel like the studio system has let you down, you didn't have to look too far to find the good stuff this year, as the insufferable film nerd in all of us got a ton of good independent dramas to drive friends and family away by talking too much about them. Anora saw Sean Baker diving back into the world of sex workers for an affecting portrait of everyday hustlers, this time with Mikey Madison and a family of Russian oligarchs. The healing power of art was on display in Sing Sing, which combined an incredible performance from Coleman Domingo with some real-life participants of the titular prison's theater program, while Ghostlight follows a grieving family through their own journey through community theater in a truly moving film. Meanwhile, Oddity was one of the most fun coming-of-age movies we've gotten in a good long while, but you know it's a good year for indie cinema when you get not one, but two films released from Luca Guadagnino. Queer finds Daniel Craig at his post-Bond best, but for our number 3 pick, we're going with that tennis movie, Challengers.
I should go, or my dad comes looking for me. I'll see you at school, Art.
Wait, are you on Facebook?
What?
He's asking for your number. And so am I.
You both want my number?
Very much so, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not a homewrecker.
We don't live together.
It's an open relationship.
Also, Patrick has a
I
girlfriend.
do not. Hey, come hang out with us later. They put you up at the hotel in Flushing, right? We're in room 206.
Want me to come tuck you in?
No, we can just keep talking. About tennis.
Good night.
That I would love a Luca Guadagnino movie is maybe the least surprising thing, but that I would have so much fun with a love triangle centered around a fairly low-stakes tennis match is what really got me. Zendaya, as a former phenom with a career cut short by injury, in between two best friends is having a cold, manipulative blast, while Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist are great foils to her machinations and play the dynamics of an ever-changing relationship perfectly. But I started this with a shout out to Luca Guadagnino, and that is where the movie really sings, because the craft that went into the climactic tennis match is really something else. Every camera trick, editing technique, and perspective shift is on display, creating a battle sequence that's downright sexy. The house music, the slow motion, the sweat, the camera literally becoming the tennis ball, its disjointed and chaotic imagery often disconnected from the sound that brings 13 years worth of friendship and rivalry to a competitive crescendo. The movie was a shocking amount of fun leading up to the tie-breaking points, but Guadagnino brought the film home with such a frantic, energetic ending, I couldn't help but talk about it even more here. It is, I'm aware, impossible to honor the rest of the globe with a single spot here, just as it was impossible for me to watch a critical mass of foreign films. Plus, it's hard to see some of these in America that aren't technically from 2023, but I'm also not about to not devote a category to foreign films, but that's already too many caveats, so here we go. Handling the Undead was a quiet and methodical zombie film based on a John Avida Lindquist novel, author of Let the Right One In, and this film occupies that same heartbreaking horror space. Ireland's Kneecap is a defiant hip-hop middle finger. I haven't seen The Girl with the Needle yet, but the trailer and all accounts of it are both beautiful and terrifying, and it's very high on my list as of press time. And while I could go on another rant about Flow, or speak more about the hypnotic allure of the beast, I'll use this spot for Evil Does Not Exist. Still clinging to the theme of surprise here, Ryusuke Hamaguchi's follow-up to his Academy Award-winning Drive My Car is unsurprisingly great. Lived in is usually a phrase reserved for dirty science fiction biomes, but here, the world of a sleepy Japanese village is so organically and naturally portrayed that lived in seems apt here as well. Ostensibly, it's a story of developers trying to convince a small town of a plan for a glamping site in their forest. It's a familiar matchup between modern greed and defenders of the natural world played out over the placement of a septic tank, but that's just the surface level. What's incredible about this film is the complete lack of answers it offers. The purposefully vague narrative doesn't offer any conclusions, but instead delivers on the premise of the title. There is no good, there is no bad, there just is. Evil Does Not Exist is an exercise in presentation. It's a simple, level-headed understanding of the way things are that seems to apply not only to the characters, but to the filmmaker's statement as well. Yes, there is tragedy, there is beauty, and they can be seen in the same breath. But that's just how it is. And sometimes, a movie doesn't want to be understood, but that's just how it is. And here we come to the most nebulous and frustrating word you can put in front of cinema. It's time to talk about the prestige dramas. The most reductive classification being, of course, Oscar bait. But really, these movies are just damn good. They include legendary performers and filmmakers playing at the top of their game, or fresh young voices ushering in a new generation. These are the movies that show everything capital C cinema is capable of. And most of the movies I've mentioned already would be right at home here. Dune Part 2 and The Substance are likely to get Best Picture nominations, for whatever that's worth. as is Anora, which gets another shout here because maybe I didn't pick it earlier because I knew I'd mention it again here, and man, it was just that good. And so, the drag of this being the final stop on my list is that there aren't quite as many left to talk about. The Brutalist is a sweeping portrait of a specific time in America through the story of one specific person, and they shot it on VistaVision, for Christ's sake. A Complete Unknown is the kind of biopic that always gets a lot of steam this time of year, while Civil War took dead aim at the division in the United States through the lens of those that document such wars. But for my number one pick, the best example of prestige drama this year had to offer was the election of a new pope in conclave.
If Tedesco becomes pope, he will undo 60 years of progress.
You talk as if you're the only alternative, but Adeyemi has the wind behind him.
Adeyemi? Adeyemi, the man who believes that homosexuals should be sent to prison in this world and hell in the next. Adeyemi's not the answer to anything, and you know it. If you want to defeat Tedesco...
This is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war!
Edward Berger moved from the trenches of World War I to a battlefield nearly as dangerous. After the Pope dies suddenly, the portrait of the ensuing conclave is one of the best political thrillers in years. Ralph Fiennes and Stanley Tucci, with an incredible Isabella Rossellini, lend their pedigree to a film immaculately executed by Berger and his team. The cinematography is on par with the paintings adorning the ceilings of the Vatican. The score is a surprisingly sparse bit of tension that may feel more familiar to a horror film. The blocking and frame compositions, the shadows cardinals hide in, the visual balance of power shifting from one faction to another are all striking. What's more, though, is the movie never takes its eyes off the point it wants to make. The highest echelons of the Catholic Church is a bureaucracy made of ambitious, fallible men, built on centuries of tradition that may or may not fit in the modern world, and as such, how best does it move forward? It's all incredible filmmaking and storytelling and all the things that a prestige drama should be, which is why we think it's one of the best movies of 2024. Well, what did you think of our year of movies 2024? Better than some? Worse than others? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to CineFix for more movie lists.